You are listening to part 87 of our series, 7 Medicines, The Wise Woman Way, with Susun Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susun. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. So, the seventh step, the seventh medicine can be very scary. And so sometimes we think, well, let me see if there's some part of it that's less scary. And so if somebody said, I want to do x-rays of your breast, we would probably say no, but we change it and we make it a mammogram, and somehow that seems okay. Or we even realize that that's radiation, and we either protect ourselves from it if we decide to have a mammogram, or we don't expose ourselves to that radiation. But more and more women are pushing for less frightening, less damaging kinds of tests. And those would include things like thermograms and sonograms and ultrasound and even MRI, which is promoted as being safer than CAT scans because it's non-radioactive. Have you ever had any of these kinds of tests?
I have, but it's been a very long time.
Yeah, they're extremely common, and we generally think of them as being a lot safer than things that have radiation, and I think that we're right to think that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are indeed completely safe. What is an MRI? An MRI is a magnetic resonance image. When hydrogen atoms are in a powerful magnetic field, they act like little bar magnets. And there are, of course, hydrogen atoms in all of your body tissues. So if you pulse energy in the form of radio waves into the body with a powerful magnetic field, then those little magnets, the hydrogen atoms, will give off a pulse that changes based on the strength of the magnetic field. And this can help us see softer, intertwined tissues in the brain, the spinal cord, and the musculoskeletal system in rich detail. My question, and it's not a question that I could find an answer to anywhere, was, what does that do to my body? What does that do to my cells? I have certainly met people who believe that pain can be decreased by wearing magnets, and that people sometimes have health problems because they live in magnetic field or electromagnetic fields. I've lived at the place where I live now for a very, very long time, but when I was looking for land, one of the places that I was thinking of buying had high-tension electrical wires. Was, well, don't camp out under the high-tension wires, but other than that, there's no problem of any kind. And I would have been willing to accept that, except that the woman of the house had a pacemaker, and the man of the house had already had 3 heart attacks. And since I think of the heart as an electrical organ, it certainly gave me pause. So I must admit that while I cannot find anybody jumping up and down and saying, wow, this freaks your cells out. And I even asked a friend who I thought had an MRI, who's very psychic, and I said, did this in any way influence your psychic ability? And she gave me this wonderful smile, and she said, no, it didn't, but it's interesting that you asked me that because I kind of wondered, too, if it was going to have that influence on me. So Is MRI as safe as we think? We don't know yet because we haven't been using it that long. As we use things longer and longer, we begin to see more into the insides of those things, as Maria Traben says. I found a very interesting article by Emily Casanova, Ph.D., called The Biology of Ultrasound. Ultrasound procedures are exactly that. Auditory waveforms, sounds that occur above the upper limit for human hearing. Ultra sounds, like all sounds, occur in waves, which is half cycles of compression and expansion. And what that means is that matter that is hit by sound, and especially ultrasound, undergoes compression and then expansion. This is one of the things that makes ultrasound potentially dangerous. I had never considered that possibility at all. 8 reasons why it's not safe or painless for your developing child to have an ultrasound by Jackie Lombardo. In December 2014, the Food and Drug Administration issued its first ever caution on ultrasound during pregnancy. I was amazed when I read that. I had no idea that the Food and Drug Administration had issued any caution at all. As a matter of fact, what I've seen over the past 10 years is an ever increasing use of ultrasound. It used to be done once during a pregnancy. Now it seems to be done almost monthly. Jackie Lombardo says ultrasound is not medically necessary. Yet, it is the most widely used of all medical imaging methods during pregnancy. There is no medical recommendation for any pregnant woman to receive an ultrasound. Nor is there any number of ultrasounds that has been specified as safe for the fetus. It may be safe. It's certainly painless for the mom. But is it safe and painless for the baby? Asked Jackie. Consider, 1, ultrasound vibrates the fetus. Ultrasound waves are vibrations. They're about 20 megahertz or 20 million cycles per second. Thus, we can't hear them, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. 2, ultrasound may not be hearable to our ears, but fetuses may be able to hear it, and it may affect fetal hearing development. The Department of Basic Ultrasound Research at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, placed a small hydrophone inside a pregnant woman's uterus and found that the force from the impact of the ultrasound pulses produced an audible, localized, high-intensity noise due to secondary vibrations in the woman's uterus. How loud? Around 100 decibels. Put that in perspective. 110 decibels is painful, and 150 decibels will rupture your eardrum. Consider that prolonged use of ultrasound results in safe energy levels. Fetal ultrasound Dopplers for use at home pose risks to your baby. The FDA strongly discourages keepsake ultrasound scans, explaining that it exposes the fetus to prolonged and unsafe energy levels. Consider, ultrasound is capable of deforming the membranes of any cell. It is precisely because ultrasound can deform cells that the FDA has approved ultrasound for use in healing bone fractures, because it accelerates cell division. Consider, ultrasound is capable of deforming brain cell membranes, and this could possibly lead to autism. Ultrasound doesn't distinguish between brain cells and other cells. Ultrasound deforms the membranes of all cells. And when that happens in the brain, it activates mechanisms that change how that cell grows and how it divides. Within the brain of autistic individuals, there appears to be something that promotes the division of certain brain cells at times when they shouldn't be dividing. Jennifer Margulis, Ph.D. And she has written a book called The Business of Baby. Consider, a significant number of neurons failed to acquire their proper position in the brain after ultrasound, according to researchers at Yale. Instead, they just remained dispersed instead of going where they were supposed to go. They took mice and they exposed the mice to ultrasound waves for 30 minutes. And then they found that their neurons were scattered all over the place, and that the scatter methodically increased with the duration of ultrasound, suggesting that any amount of ultrasound can harm the developing brain, but the longer the ultrasound, the more harm. Ultrasound prevents proper neuron migration to appropriate positions in the developing brain. Consider, ultrasound can make tissues hot enough to cause damage. Ultrasound can heat the tissues, and in some cases it produces cavitation in those tissues. The long-term effects of tissue heating and cavitation are not known. Bubble formation within a liquid that has been exposed to ultrasound is called cavitation. And when that bubble implodes, it creates considerable pressure in the surrounding medium. Ultrasound scans, says biomedical engineer Sharam Vazi, Ph.D., should only be done when there is a medical need, not for curiosity's sake. Consider, no study has ever shown that ultrasound improves the health of babies. Certainly, a case for the use of ultrasound can be made because it can detect abnormalities early enough for the parents to choose to abort. But of the 5,000 potential chromosomal abnormalities that we now understand, ultrasound can detect but a handful, such as Down syndrome. And ultrasound can misdiagnose abnormalities when there are none, can seem to show an abnormality in which nothing can be done. Ultrasound is disturbing to parents who understand that the fetus is influenced by absolutely everything that happens to it. In summary, says Jackie Lombardo, ultrasound should not be routinely used during pregnancy. Ultrasound should not be used to check the sex of the child. Ultrasound should not be used to satisfy people's curiosity. If there is a medical necessity for it, it should be used for as short a time as possible. Healthy pregnancies do not require any ultrasounds at all. Autism affects 1 out of every 42 boys. The incidence is growing. It's not vaccines, is it? Our growing desire to use ultrasound to peer into the uterus and to see things? The amount of ultrasound exposure that fetuses are receiving is increasing year by year. And our understanding of the amount that can damage the fetus is also expanding. In fact, we now know that the amount of ultrasound exposure required to produce damage to the human fetus is very, very low. The Chinese Journal of Ultrasound in Medicine and Biology states, after a review of many studies, it is clear that routine ultrasound should be avoided. Only when there are exceptional medical indications should ultrasound be allowed, and at minimum intensity. Sessions should be very brief, no more than 3 minutes, 5 minutes at the very most, and multiple ultrasound sessions should be avoided because hazards from the use of ultrasound are cumulative. Human studies have found that sensitive organs in the fetus can be damaged with as little as 1 minute of exposure to ultrasound. Kelly Brogan, MD, says today's pregnancies and today's children are using things that I would call high-tech medicine more and more. It's becoming normal, but it doesn't make them consistent with what our genomes need based on millions of years of evolution. We don't make a healthy child from bottle feeding and surgical birth, from ultrasound and pesticides and processed foods and antibiotics. Why are 1 in 6 of our children learning disabled? Of course, it's not just one thing, but it's a way of thinking about ourselves. There are deficiencies, not just nutrient deficiencies, that render a pregnancy full of ultrasounds the loading of a gun. And we don't know when it will go off. What is she saying? She's saying that it's not just the ultrasound. She's saying it's a whole way of viewing pregnancy. And that there are multiple things that we are already exposed to. Industrial chemicals, pesticides, processed foods, psychiatric drugs, antibiotics. These things are in our water. They are in our food supply. It's not just an ultrasound done on an optimally healthy woman with an optimally healthy baby. There are already things going on. Even if ultrasound didn't load the gun, clinicians like Dr. Sarah Buckley argue that the very existence of ultrasounds opens up a psychic chasm within pregnant women, transforming the seamless experience of being with child into the possession of a scannable medical object, a locus of risk instead of a future healthy child. I urge all women to seek out pregnancy support that honors the unfolding of the enigmatic process of pregnancy and birth, and that supports the mother-fetus dyad by sending evolutionarily recognizable signals of safety through nutrient-dense food, movement, and calm. And Maurice Leboyer would add music, that the developing fetus needs music. Kelly Brogan ends by saying, home birth midwives and doulas know exactly what I am talking about. Yes, these tests are safer than tests that have radiation in them. But we may not really be able to protect ourselves against them. That was what really made me kind of stop and wonder, really, what is safer? When medical science tells us that ultrasound's interaction with biological tissues is known to induce a wide variety of non-thermal effects ranging from hemorrhage and necrosis to damage to cells and their membranes, including permeability enhancement, angiogenesis induction, and increased gene transfection. I have to ask myself how we have come to think that an ultrasound in pursuit of a diagnosis of whether or not someone has cancer is safe. Obviously, nothing we are doing in the seventh river, nothing we are doing in the seventh medicine is going to be safe. I think what most of us want is to be able to make an honest risk-benefit comparison. Until I had looked for information about ultrasound I had no idea that there was so much science behind the ill effects that are not possible, but that are definitely caused by using that. I think that what we're seeing through our talking and studying and these shows together is that we don't necessarily want to know everything, and we don't necessarily want to use high-tech diagnosis, because no matter how safe high-tech diagnosis is, it nonetheless causes damage. A psychic diagnosis is a safe diagnosis. A high-tech diagnosis is going to draw us a little deeper into the medical establishment and a little deeper into damage, not just from the test, but from the consequences of the test. Ovarian cancer screening seems like a good idea. Ovarian cancer is up there in terms of cancer deaths in women, mostly because it's very hard to tell if you have ovarian cancer until it is already advanced and metastasized. So we have all been waiting the results of the multi-center prostate, lung, colorectal, and ovarian trial in which more than 68,000 U.S. women were randomized to undergo annual screening. That was the measurement of cancer antigen CA-125 for 6 years and vaginal ultrasound for 4 years, or their usual medical care. Researchers hope to show that screening would detect ovarian malignancies earlier and lower ovarian cancer-related mortality. During a median 12.4-year follow-up, participants and their healthcare providers basically found that screening didn't provide any benefit. Ovarian cancer was diagnosed in 0.6% of the women in the intervention group and 0.5% of the women in the usual care group. Late-stage cancers were 69% in the screening group and 78% in the non-screening group. And in fact, cancer-related deaths occurred in almost exactly equal numbers, with 118 women in the intervention, the screening group, dying, and 100 women in the care as usual group dying. Among those diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the two groups, the average length of survival was similar. However, of those 68,000 women, 3,285 of them got false positive results. That's about 5% of the women at each annual screening. Of those 3,285, 1,080 underwent surgery, and a third of those surgeries were removal of the ovaries as a diagnostic evaluation, and 15% of those women had serious complications during or after surgery. Seems like a simple thing, doesn't it? Let's see if we can find ovarian cancer early, and we'll do it in non-invasive ways. We'll just use ultrasound and drawing blood. And yet, it turns out to be more and more invasive as women face the fear of a diagnosis that turns out to be wrong, but it isn't known until after that body part is removed. And the pathologist can say, "You're in luck. You didn't have cancer after all." Next week, we're going to look at some do-it-yourself tests. Until then, green blessings.
Thank you, Susan, and this concludes part 87 of our series, The 7 Medicines the Wise Woman Way, with Susun Weed at Time Monk Radio.